They called my trucks an eyesore and blocked the gates during a government-authorized emergency supply drop. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stood with arms crossed like she was defending Fort Knox from boxes of medical equipment. What she didn't know? I don't just own those trucks. I supply the National Guard. And this little game she played, it's about to become federal. Let me tell you about the time a power-hungry HOA tried to mess with the wrong neighbor. Me. I moved into a charming little gated community last year after retiring from 22 years of military logistics. The place looked perfect. Quiet cul-de-sacs, well-kept lawns, and enough room to run my veteran-owned delivery company from a warehouse just 3 miles down the road. What I didn't account for was Karen. Now, I don't mean that as an insult. Her actual name is Karen Simmons. She's the head of our HOA security committee, and let me tell you, she takes that job more seriously than the TSA at a presidential motorcade. At first, it was little things. A friendly notice on my door about leaving my porch light on past 11 p.m. A reminder that trash cans must be rolled in within 30 minutes of pickup. A snippy email about a delivery van parked in my driveway for longer than the allotted 15-minute window. I brushed it off. Every neighborhood has its busybody. But Karen, she's not just nosy, she's territorial. And she hates trucks. You see, my business involves large military-grade delivery trucks. Not tanks, not semis, just sturdy, boxy, camo-painted vehicles that carry critical supplies to places like emergency shelters, FEMA drop points, and yes, even the National Guard. Twice a week, my drivers swing by the house to grab paperwork, maybe load a small parcel or two before heading out. They're respectful, quiet, in and out in 10 minutes. But to Karen, they were industrial pollution in a residential sanctuary. One Thursday afternoon, things escalated. My driver, Miguel, called me from the front gate. "Boss, I'm being blocked. Security won't let me through. They said HOA policy changed this morning." I looked at my email. Nothing. I drove down to the gate, and there she was, Karen in a visor, clipboard in hand, blocking my truck with a golf cart like she was reenacting the Cuban Missile Crisis. I kept it civil. "Karen, he's here for a delivery. You can't just make up a policy midweek." She didn't even look at me. Commercial vehicles are no longer permitted on residential roads during daylight hours. It was voted in by emergency session this morning. You would have known if you came to meetings. Let me pause here. You know how HOA votes work, right? You need a quorum, you need notice, you need transparency. Unless you rewrite the bylaws to allow the security chair to enact temporary emergency measures without a vote if there's an imminent threat to neighborhood harmony. Guess who proposed that clause last quarter? Guess who voted it in when half the neighborhood was on spring break? Guess who is the security chair? That's right, Karen. Now here's where it gets juicy. The delivery she blocked that day, it was part of a federally contracted shipment. My company had been tasked with delivering emergency cold storage units to a National Guard medical depot upstate. This wasn't Amazon packages or lawn chairs. This was federal emergency infrastructure. And she held it up because she thought the trucks were ugly. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten. I just looked at her and said, "You know, Karen, interfering with a federal contractor's operation is a pretty bold move for someone whose security training consists of watching NCIS reruns." She blinked. "This is private property. I have the right to—" "No," I interrupted. "You don't. And tomorrow you're going to find out why." The next morning, bright and early, I got a call from Sergeant Ramirez, an old buddy from my logistics days, now stationed with the National Guard. He said, "We heard you had a little delivery delay. Want us to help smooth that out?" Oh, bless him. I didn't even have to ask. At exactly 10:02 a.m., 3 marked National Guard SUVs rolled up to the entrance of our little slice of suburban heaven. They weren't flashing lights or anything. They weren't here to intimidate, just to ask questions. But let me tell you something. Karen saw those uniforms and turned a shade of pale you only see in dental offices. She strutted out of the gatehouse like she had jurisdiction. "Excuse me, this is private property. You can't just—" Ramirez held up a folder. "Ma'am, we're investigating a potential obstruction of a federally contracted supply route. We have reason to believe someone here interfered with a delivery related to emergency infrastructure." Karen blinked. There must be some misunderstanding. We just have rules. No commercial traffic on weekdays. It's for the children. For the children? Ramirez echoed, raising an eyebrow. You mean the policy enacted yesterday during an unannounced HOA emergency vote? The officer beside him flipped open a copy of the HOA's updated bylaws, ones I'd forwarded to Ramirez the night before. See, Karen thought she was clever. She made sure nobody else on the board knew about her little emergency clause. I'd spent half the night gathering screenshots, timestamps, and old emails proving the whole vote was a one-woman show. One of the residents, a retired school principal named Diane, had even emailed the HOA asking for clarification weeks ago and was ignored. I handed that over too. Now, for those who don't know, interfering with a federally contracted emergency delivery, even unintentionally, can still trigger a federal inquiry, especially if the delay causes disruptions at a National Guard site. This wasn't a criminal investigation yet, but it was going on the record. Karen stood frozen, eyes darting from one uniform to another. For once, her clipboard wasn't doing the talking. You're not in trouble yet, Ramirez said gently, but we're going to need access to your security footage from yesterday. You do keep records, right? I swear you could hear her swallow. Yes, she stammered, but it only records the gate entrance, and only in 30-second intervals, and only when— Perfect, Ramirez cut in. That's where the truck was blocked. We'll take it from here. By lunchtime, rumors were flying faster than a bingo hall scandal. A few of my neighbors came by, pretending to water their lawns just to catch a glimpse of the guards' SUVs. One guy, Earl, gave me a thumbs up from across the street like I just won the Super Bowl. People were starting to realize that Karen's reign of petty terror might have hit a wall. Now, let me be clear. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to make this woman's life miserable. All I wanted was to run my business in peace, without being penalized for having a few delivery vans and a flag on my porch that didn't match the HOA-approved shade of subtle sand. But Karen had turned the HOA into her own little fiefdom. She'd fined an elderly widow for having wind chimes deemed too whimsical. She'd issued warnings for holiday decorations that exceeded acceptable sparkle. She once tried to fine someone for leaving a basketball hoop on their driveway overnight. People were fed up, but no one wanted to be the one to challenge her. Until now. The monthly HOA board meeting was that Thursday. Normally it's just Karen and 3 other folks she bulldozes over. This time, the room was packed. Even residents who hadn't shown up in years were there, popcorn in hand, like it was reality TV. I arrived early and took a seat near the front. Karen tried to carry on like normal, tapping her pen on her clipboard, adjusting her reading glasses dramatically. Let's begin with landscaping violation, she started, but someone raised a hand. Actually, Karen, Diane said sweetly, I think we need to address the security incident first. Karen's lips tightened. That's not on the agenda. Another neighbor chimed in. Yeah, neither was rewriting our bylaws without a proper vote. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. I could see Karen's knuckles whitening around her pen. I have here, I said, standing up, documentation showing that the emergency policy used to block my federally contracted delivery was enacted without notice, quorum, or community vote. I handed copies to the board. Then I added, and I have footage of the delivery being delayed, along with testimony from National Guard officers who had to step in. They're submitting a formal report to the county. One of the board members, a retired lawyer, looked over the documents and let out a low whistle. Karen, this is bad. Karen tried to speak, something about preserving the aesthetic integrity of the community, but it was too late. People weren't afraid of her anymore. The board voted unanimously to suspend Karen's powers pending a full investigation. She tried to protest, but the lawyer on the board reminded her that if she pushed it, she might trigger a formal legal inquiry into HOA misconduct. 2 days later, an official notice went out to the entire neighborhood. Karen Simmons is no longer acting as head of the HOA security committee. That weekend, the gatehouse camera system was replaced with a professional vendor, and the entire bylaw set was scheduled for public review. As for my delivery trucks, the community passed a revised policy allowing for business-related deliveries with pre-registration. Common sense stuff. I even offered to help set up a new online system for that, for free. Funny thing is, Karen still lives here, but these days she doesn't strut around with her clipboard. She walks her dog at 6 a.m., sunglasses on, and doesn't make eye contact. Someone put a "No Trucks Allowed" bumper sticker on her mailbox. I had nothing to do with it, but I did laugh. Now, after everything that happened, the gate drama, the National Guard, the HOA meeting where Karen got publicly benched, you'd think any reasonable person would just lay low for a while. Maybe take up knitting, find peace in gardening, bake something, but not Karen. Karen doesn't do reasonable. Nope. 3 weeks after her precious emergency commercial vehicle ban got tossed into the HOA bonfire, I got a letter. A real certified lawyer-sounding envelope. My first thought? Please don't let it be another HOA fine for mailbox color inconsistencies. But this wasn't from the HOA. It was from the State Licensing Board, specifically the Department of Transportation Compliance Office. Apparently, someone had filed an official complaint alleging that my logistics company was improperly licensed to operate in a residential area, and worse, that I was using civilian zoning for military-grade operations without permits. My jaw literally dropped. This wasn't just a Karen letter. This was a calculated attack. The kind of thing someone cooks up while sipping decaf chamomile tea and watching reruns of Judge Judy with a legal pad in hand. Let me give you the full flavor of the accusation. The complainant believes Mr. Redacted is running a government-adjacent operation in violation of local zoning laws and endangering the tranquility and property values of the neighborhood. Endangering the tranquility? Lady, I run trucks, not missile drills. It didn't take a genius to figure out who filed the complaint. The attached evidence included grainy phone photos, ones taken from behind HOA hedges, of my delivery truck parked on my driveway for all of 7 minutes. One picture even had Miguel, my driver, standing next to it holding a Gatorade. Menacing, I know. Now at this point, I was angry, but not panicked. See, Karen didn't know the whole story. Yes, I was operating a logistics company. Yes, I occasionally had short-term supply transfers happen near my residence. But what Karen didn't know was that I'd already had a full compliance inspection from the city 6 months earlier when I first moved in. Why? Because I believe in covering my bases. I'd proactively filed a zoning review and had written clearance stating that as long as I didn't operate heavy machinery or store inventory at the home address, I was 100% in the clear. But Karen's complaint kicked off a formal investigation, paperwork, interviews, scheduled inspections. Time out of my day, time out of my business. And frankly, I was getting real tired of playing defense. So I called in some favors. First, I contacted my business attorney, no-nonsense, ex-JAG officer, scary when she smiles. Then I looped in our Army logistics liaison, just in case Karen tried to stir the pot with the federal side. Finally, I reached out to a local reporter. Not to go scorched earth, mind you, just to talk. Turns out the reporter had already heard rumors. See, Karen had pulled similar tricks in the past, weaponizing city ordinances to pressure residents she didn't like. There was even a case 3 years ago where she tried to get a neighbor cited for improper use of residential property because he hosted a backyard jazz night once a month. Scandalous. This time, though, Karen had gone too far, because while I was ready, she wasn't. 2 weeks later, the compliance officer came by for an in-person inspection. Nice guy, mid-50s, said he used to run shipping logistics for a hospital system. He took one look at my driveway, the truck logs, the paperwork, and said, "Sir, I'm not sure why this even got escalated." I smiled. "Oh, I have a very good idea why." He chuckled, looked around the property, and shook his head. "You're cleaner than half the places I inspect. No violations, not even close." I thanked him, and as he turned to leave, he said, "By the way, you're not the first person to get complaints from this HOA. We've got a whole file started under Simmons, Karen." Now we were getting somewhere. The local paper, the Sun Valley Sentinel, ran a small but sharp piece the following Sunday. When HOA power goes too far, one neighborhood's battle with overreach. Retired military contractor faces baseless complaints after delivering supplies for the National Guard. Sources say it's not the first time HOA leadership has blurred the lines between personal vendettas and community policy. There was a photo of a military-style truck next to a Welcome Home Veterans sign. Miguel made the front page holding a sandwich. The article was tasteful but damning. And the neighborhood? Oh, people noticed. I started getting friendly waves from folks who hadn't made eye contact in months. A couple of the older residents, ones who'd been quietly steamrolled by Karen for years, knocked on my door to say, "Good on you." And Karen, she did what all tyrants do when the tide turns. She panicked. The very next HOA board meeting was tense. Karen tried to act like nothing had happened. She handed out printed agendas, commented on hedge heights, and even smiled. But halfway through the meeting, Diane, bless her, again, stood up. I moved for a vote to remove Karen Simmons permanently from any position of leadership within this HOA due to repeated abuse of procedural authority, targeted harassment, and filing of baseless legal claims against fellow residents. Dead silence. Then one by one, hands went up. The motion passed. Karen stood there stunned, her smile frozen in place. She tried to stammer something about not being given a fair chance, but no one was listening. The HOA president leaned into his mic and said, "Thank you for your service, Karen. We'll take it from here." Life got quieter after that. The HOA replaced its emergency bylaws with a public charter. Deliveries were allowed within reasonable hours, and aesthetics could no longer be used as a catch-all reason for harassment. Karen still lives here, barely. I hear she's been trying to sell, but word gets around. Turns out, the woman who tried to sue a National Guard contractor isn't a great real estate hook. As for me, my business is doing just fine. I still run a tight operation, still support veterans, and yes, my trucks still roll through the neighborhood from time to time. Nobody complains. Well, except Karen's little dog, but he just yaps from behind a curtain. I think even he's embarrassed at this point. Just when we thought it was safe to enter our porches again, Karen came back. Now, if you've ever lived in an HOA-controlled neighborhood, you know there are two things more persistent than crabgrass: mildew and former HOA officers who refuse to take a hint. Let me paint the picture. It's been about 2 months since Karen got voted out, humiliatingly, publicly, and unanimously. Since then, life in the neighborhood had noticeably improved. Deliveries came and went without incident. The HOA newsletter got shorter and friendlier. Nobody got fined for having American flags slightly outside regulation size. It was, dare I say it, peaceful. Until one Tuesday afternoon, a glossy postcard showed up in everyone's mailbox. Red, white, and blue with a waving flag clip art that looked like it was stolen from a 2003 PowerPoint slide. Across the top in all caps, a strong voice for community values. Re-elect Karen Simmons to the HOA board. Re-elect? I nearly spit out my coffee. You have to give it to her. She's got nerve. So here's how Karen pulled her little Lazarus act. You see, our HOA has staggered board terms. Members serve 2-year terms, but the board is elected annually in rotating slots. Karen's removal had only ousted her from her appointed position as head of the security committee, not her eligibility to run again as a general board member. And wouldn't you know it? One seat was opening up this quarter. She pounced on that loophole like a cat on a sunbeam. Within a week, her yard had a Karen for Community sign stuck in the lawn, tastefully HOA compliant in size and color, of course. Then came the door-to-door campaign. I kid you not, Karen went house to house with a clipboard and a pamphlet, telling anyone who'd opened their door that she had been wrongfully removed and that certain individuals, meaning me apparently, were trying to commercialize the neighborhood. Her platform? Restoring order. Translation, make the HOA annoying again. At first, I thought it was a joke. No way people would take her seriously after everything that happened. But to my surprise, a few neighbors actually started wavering. Well, Karen's slick. She didn't go after the people she knew despised her. She focused on the quiet folks, the ones who didn't attend meetings, who just wanted their lawns mowed and peace and quiet. She painted herself as a misunderstood leader, a victim of overreaction, a guardian of standards. And here's the worst part. In HOA elections, very few people actually vote. All it takes is a handful of ballots to swing the results. The HOA board, to their credit, couldn't stop her from running. They were furious, but rules are rules. If she followed the process, she was allowed on the ballot. That meant if we wanted to keep her out, we had to actually campaign. And so began the most ridiculous political showdown in the history of Oak Ridge Heights. Now, I never wanted to get into HOA politics. I have a business to run, a life to live, and frankly, a strong aversion to clipboards. But this was personal. So I teamed up with Diane, the retired principal turned neighborhood hero, and Earl, who had been fined by Karen 3 times for leaving his garage door open too long in the mornings. We didn't go negative, we went factual. We made a flyer, simple, clean, black and white. Before you vote, know the facts. Karen single-handedly blocked a federal supply drop. She rewrote bylaws without community input. She filed a false complaint that triggered a state investigation. She was removed from office by unanimous board vote. We went house to house, not knocking, just leaving it in mailboxes and talking to folks we knew. And the funny thing was, people wanted to talk. Turns out, a lot of folks had been silently irritated by Karen for years, but hadn't known how to say it out loud. We became the unintentional therapy group for HOA survivors. Did she really try to ban wind chimes? She fined me $50 for a garden gnome. She yelled at my granddaughter for drawing with sidewalk chalk. By election week, the signs were clear. Karen had stirred the pot one too many times again. The votes were counted into the clubhouse. And let me tell you, it felt like watching a presidential election in miniature. We had coffee and Costco cookies set out. Someone even brought those little toothpick cheese cubes. Classy. Then the results came in. Karen lost. Badly. She got 17% of the vote. The rest went to Diane, who had agreed to run just to make sure Karen didn't get in unopposed. People cheered. I'm talking actual clapping, like she'd just been voted off a reality show. Karen didn't stick around. She quietly gathered her things and left. Someone said they saw her take the Karen for Community sign out of her yard the next morning, before sunrise. No clipboard, no speeches, just gone. Since then, Oak Ridge Heights has entered what we jokingly call the post-Karen era. Diane's doing a great job on the board. The HOA meetings are shorter, friendlier, and no one's afraid to put out a seasonal wreath or fly a flag anymore. My deliveries come and go as needed. Miguel even waves to the new security guard, who isn't a HOA volunteer with delusions of grandeur. He's an actual professional from a vetted company. Go figure. Neighbors smile more. We had our first community BBQ in 5 years. Karen didn't show. But the best part? People now pay attention. They vote. They ask questions. They read the minutes. Because once you've had a Karen, you don't want another. You would think, after being removed from the board, humiliated in an election, and publicly exposed for misusing HOA rules like a toddler with a police badge, that Karen would finally call it quits. But Karen doesn't quit. She escalates. 2 months after her failed HOA board comeback, we got wind of something new, or rather, something legal. A neighbor, one of the nice retired folks who reads everything like it's the newspaper crossword, rang my doorbell with a thick envelope in his hand. "Did you get one of these?" he asked, holding it up like it was radioactive. Inside, a letter from Karen's attorney. Yep, she was suing. Not just the HOA board, not just Diane, not even me, which was surprising. Karen had filed an official civil complaint against the entire HOA for defamation of character, unlawful removal, and reputational damage. Her claim? As a result of targeted harassment and improper removal from her position, Ms. Karen Simmons has suffered emotional distress, reputational harm, and professional exclusion from neighborhood governance. Professional exclusion from neighborhood governance? You mean not being allowed to run your little clipboard kingdom like a feudal duchy? Give me a break. Now here's the thing, HOA boards aren't made up of attorneys. They're made up of retirees, small business owners, and occasionally former teachers like Diane who just want their street lights fixed and their neighbors left alone. So when the HOA got served with Karen's lawsuit, it rattled them for about 30 seconds. Then they got serious. The HOA retained counsel, a local firm that specializes in HOA litigation. Turns out Karen wasn't their first overly ambitious board member, not by a long shot. At the first mediation session, Karen's lawyer demanded a public apology from the HOA board, a reversal of her removal, a cash settlement in acknowledgement of reputational harm. Their justification? That Karen had been unfairly portrayed as a villain and that her removal was procedurally unsound. Well, guess what? The HOA had receipts, every vote, every email, every incident report. the National Guard letters, the state compliance investigation she triggered, even photos from her campaign flyers that contradicted her own claims. Her lawyer clearly didn't expect them to be this organized. You ever seen a room go silent in real time? That happened during legal discovery. Turns out, Karen had been emailing select board members long before her removal, using personal accounts, to manipulate vote counts and convince people to approve bylaw changes off the record. Worse, she had one email where she straight up said, "We need to get ahead of my neighbor's delivery situation before it becomes a precedent. If we make enough noise, he might just give up and move." That was about me, another gem. Nobody reads the bylaws anyway. I can pass this if I push it through at the next session. The others will just sign. And one more, this time about Diane. She's too sweet for her own good. I'll find a way to push her out if she keeps asking questions. Oh no, Karen, no, no, no. Once the emails hit the table, Karen's entire case collapsed faster than a dollar store folding chair. The defamation claim? Gone. She did the things people were accusing her of. The unlawful removal claim? Gone. She violated multiple HOA procedures and was removed unanimously with documentation. The reputational harm? Please. At the next mediation session, Karen's lawyer looked like he regretted ever taking her case. They tried to settle quietly, asking the HOA to agree to neutral language in the meeting minutes and for Karen to be allowed to attend meetings without restriction. The board said no, politely, firmly, and with legal backup. In the end, Karen dropped the lawsuit, with prejudice, meaning she couldn't file it again. She also had to pay part of the HOA's legal fees. Ouch. And since the lawsuit had made it into local news, thank you again, Sun Valley Sentinel, her name was now forever attached to a failed HOA power grab and frivolous legal action. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign went up on Karen's lawn. She tried to keep it quiet. No open house signs, no flyers. But word travels fast in a neighborhood where folks walk their dogs twice a day and talk at every mailbox. When the moving trucks arrived, irony alert, same brand as my trucks, nobody waved, nobody brought over cookies. Karen packed her clipboard into the back seat, got into her Lexus, and left without so much as a goodbye. Just like that, she was gone. Since then, life's been nice. The HOA holds transparent meetings with actual minutes. People show up, not because they're scared, but because they're curious and, dare I say it, hopeful. We even updated the HOA bylaws, for real this time, to prevent unilateral emergency decisions and to make sure any board removal requires both a vote and a third-party review. All thanks to the Karen Clause. Yes, that's what we actually call it. We had our first neighborhood chili cook-off in a decade. Miguel won third place. Nobody was fined for parking on the curb. Even the guy with the neon flamingo mailbox got to keep it. Turns out, when people feel safe from petty tyranny, they relax, they smile, they live. You know, when I first moved into this place, I just wanted a quiet life, a nice yard, good neighbors, and a place to run my business without drama. I never imagined I'd end up in a suburban showdown with a woman wielding HOA bylaws like throwing stars. But here's the thing, when people like Karen get power unchecked, they push the limits until someone pushes back. And when enough neighbors stand together, clipboard tyrants don't stand a chance. So if you're dealing with your own Karen, keep your records, stay calm, and know this, justice doesn't always come fast. But when it does, oh, it's delicious. And if you think this was the end, wait till you hear what Karen tried to do from her new neighborhood, to be continued in the bonus epilogue or sequel. So, you'd think it's over. The clipboard's been retired. The trucks roll in peacefully. The flamingo mailbox stands tall. But Karen doesn't vanish. She relocates. About 6 months after she moved out, I got a phone call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It was Mike, an old army buddy who runs a small landscaping business 2 towns over. He sounded amused. "Hey," he said, "didn't you used to live next to a lady named Karen Simmons?" I froze. "You didn't hire her, did you?" He laughed. "Worse. She's on the HOA board in my neighborhood now, and she just tried to fine one of my crews for trimming hedges too aggressively." Oh no, she was at it again. Turns out, Karen had moved into a slightly smaller community called Silver Pines, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with just 70 homes and a volunteer HOA board that mostly existed to plan yard sales and keep the pool clean. Within a month of moving in, Karen volunteered for documentation review. A month after that, she was helping with compliance. By month 3, she had a full-on spreadsheet of neighborhood violations, font size 8, single-spaced. Here are just a few things she flagged. A patriotic mailbox wrap being seasonally inappropriate, a garden gnome that implied sarcasm, a veteran's flag that wasn't at a government-approved angle. Mike's crew fined $100 for using a gas-powered trimmer during protected quiet hours. The quiet hour? 10:30 a.m. But here's the kicker. Silver Pines had recently switched to an HOA management company, one with actual oversight, legal backing, and a real sense of policy. And their head of compliance? My friend Laura, a no-nonsense former city attorney who had heard every HOA horror story in the book. I gave her a heads up. Karen Simmons, she repeated. Didn't she get flagged in that state case last year? I sent her links, screenshots, even the Sun Valley Sentinel article titled "The Clipboard Queen Who Went Too Far." Laura did her homework. She found that Karen had withheld key HOA communications from board members and had been attempting to introduce new policy changes without community review. Within weeks, Karen was called in for a meeting, not an HOA meeting, a compliance hearing. And this time there were real consequences. Karen lost her board privileges. Again. But this time, she didn't just get removed from a committee. She got flagged in the HOA system statewide. That means if she tries to serve on another HOA board in the next few years, her name pops up in internal databases as a high-risk community officer. It's like being HOA blacklisted, a Karen-sized scarlet letter. She's still living in Silver Pines, but rumor has it she's keeping to herself. Her porch is quiet, her hedges are average, and her clipboard, nowhere to be seen. Look, we all know HOAs can be helpful when they're run with fairness, transparency, and actual community spirit. But put a power-hungry personality in charge, and suddenly your mailbox color becomes a federal case. I never asked to become the guy who took down Karen. But when you mess with the National Guard, my business, and my basic right to get a delivery without a side of harassment, you're going to get some resistance. And here's what I've learned. Documentation beats intimidation. Neighbors stick together when they know they're not alone. And most importantly, never underestimate a suburban dad with a printer and free time. Now I want to hear your story. Have you ever had a Karen in your neighborhood? What's the wildest HOA rule or fine you've ever gotten? Or are you on an HOA board? What's your side of the story? Drop it in the comments below. And don't worry, we've all got a story or two to share. Let's compare notes, laugh together, and maybe learn a thing or two about what not to do with a clipboard. And hey, if you thought this was wild, wait till you hear what Karen's daughter tried to pull in her college dorm's resident council. Yes, apparently clipboard mania runs in the family. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell so you don't miss the next HOA horror story. Thanks for sticking with me through the Ks. Stay strong, stay sane, and remember, always read the bylaws.